intro?
Sure.
Yep, okay.
Am I starting?
All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the library. My name is Troy Swanson. I'm the library department chair. Today's event is about language and words, and it is part of our ongoing conversation about disability. Our one book title this year is called Disability Visibility, and we've had really excellent discussions, and we are welcoming back for round two Sharon, Brennan, and Nate Payovich from our Center for Disability Services. Nate is a director. Sharon is one of our counselors. And so they're going to guide us and help us think about disability and how we talk about disability and that kind of stuff. So I don't know more than that, so I'll let you take us where we're going to go. Thank you all for coming. Thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's good. Thank you all. How are you? Good. Thanks for being here with us today. As we get started, again, my name is Sharon. This is Nate. And with the presentation, The Power of Words, it's important to begin by just thinking about the weight that the words that you use and the words that you hear carry, whether it be in your life, in your interactions, in the way you feel about yourself, and in the way that you begin to feel and think about other people and other things. That is kind of the baseline importance of why this presentation is going on, so that we can be really mindful of how much weight the words we choose can weigh and impact others and individuals, especially when we think about individuals with disabilities. We are really hoping that today, as we talk more, it'll help us to recognize individually maybe biases or phrasing that we've used that could have been better, and that you leave today with some very good information, possibly ways to rephrase, and also a little bit more knowledge, if not a lot more knowledge, but courage to speak up and to help guide others in maybe a better, more helpful, healthy, respectful way of communicating. So thank you for that. If you have questions at any point, please also feel free to raise your hand. Okay, and we'd be happy to discuss with you. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So, as we get started, we want to think about individuals with disabilities. They represent our nation's largest minority group. And individuals can join this group at any time. You know, individuals are born with disabilities. They can end up with a disability after an accident, as a result of illness, due to aging. And so it's an ongoing, growing group of individuals. 1 in 5 individuals has a disability, and disabilities don't discriminate, right? They don't choose based on your age or your race or your ethnicity, your religion, your sexual orientation, whether you have a lot of money or not a lot of money. Disabilities are across the board, impacting everybody, or the ability to. And then we need to remember that disabilities can be visible and invisible. You don't necessarily, as with everything, know what the story of someone's life is by looking at them. And so the power of words, right, if we are not aware of our assumptions, if we're not aware of how that might play into our communication and our conversations, could really land in a negative way. So thanks for being open to this conversation today. Individuals with disabilities are also often on the receiving end of prejudice, discrimination, misunderstanding, and lots of assumptions. So let's talk about maybe what some common myths might be and create the alternative fact, okay? So commonly, some people might think, you might have heard, at one point you might have also thought, right, that the lives of people with disabilities are totally different than the lives of people without disabilities. You know, you start to think, oh, a person with a disability can't do certain things, or they can't. And right there is kind of where we want to pause, right? Because the fact of the matter is that an individual with a disability can have, you know, and does and do have very normal lives like everybody else. We all do. We all love, we all get angry, we all get sad, we all hold jobs, we all go to school, we all pay taxes, we all, what are some of the other examples? You know, we all do these things. Oh, I didn't have it. So, oh. Sorry. Okay, I jumped ahead. I jumped into a different bullet, so I threw myself off. But we all, we all have children. Everybody does these things. Everyone has the opportunity to live a full life. And so we want to make sure that we're catching any assumption that maybe someone isn't able to do that. Oftentimes, I'll hear this come up, even when I'm working with students, about the assumption of, well, my disability is this, and therefore, I don't think I can be a nurse. Or my disability, is this, and so I've been told that I might want to rethink a career in criminal justice. And by assuming that, we are really kind of feeding the negative viewpoints, the negative assumptions, the biases that happen in our society and that others, individuals experience as a result, when that is not necessarily true, right? And just because you have a disability and just because you don't doesn't mean something's a good fit, right? There's so much more to the story. There's also the common myth that people with disabilities always need help. And that if you see or if you can see that somebody has a disability, that you should be, running into rescue. And whereas your intention is to be kind, we need to remember that our intention may not land the way that we're intending it to, because every individual is different. And when you recognize that maybe someone is struggling, if you do it for them without asking if they need help, you're actually disempowering them in a way. You're making them, you could be sending the message that you don't think they can do it on their own. And that may not be your intention, but that could be how it would land. So we want to be really careful, and we want to say, ask, can I help you? Would you like me to hold that for you? Can I assist you through the door? Is there something I could do to help? But we don't want to assume, and we don't want to rush in to rescue. We want to allow people to have their individuality and their own agency in making their decisions and living their life, and then also be present and available if needed, but not assume that we are. And that kind of leads into this next bullet point about people with disabilities are brave and courageous. If you say to someone, for example, wow, you are really brave for applying to that program, or you have so much courage to continue going to work, or to continue doing these things that we're looking at and identifying as like strifes, like challenges that every other person doesn't also face, right? The challenges of continuing to go to work, or the challenges of continuing to follow through, or the challenges of applying to a difficult program, for example. And we're putting out the idea that it's negative. We're assuming that it's negative, that it's bad, that it's you're at a major disadvantage as a result, and you're kind of rising above. And that it's just not fair. It's not accurate, it's not fair. It's disqualifying of that individual and what they're capable of because of an assumption. And then, the power of one. This comes up in a lot of different areas for me, but the power of one. In conversation, you might hear people say, well, what am I going to do? What can I do to change it? Or I'm just one person. Or, if we're not in it together, then I don't know. Is it going to make an impact? And I just always repeat the power of one. One person can make a big difference in helping and in helping to change an attitude and to create an avenue for someone to think a little differently, right? Even if it's just changing certain phrasing today, who knows what can progress as the days come forward. So keep in mind that today, it's the hope that we could start by changing something and recognizing as we kind of continue with the presentation about the different ways that we use language, the different types of language that we can use, especially when it comes to talking with and working with and living with, others and those with disabilities, and how recognizing just in your own self, oh, this is something I can alter, how it can make such a huge positive impact, and really impact others around you. Like, oh, I noticed that phrasing, and I never thought of it before, right? As soon as you start thinking about something, one of the major things about intervention is once you notice it, you got to hold it. You can't unnotice it. So once you hear it today, it's our hope that you will continue to stir on it, think about it, and practice it moving forward. So to kind of get us started, we have this little video clip. Probably should have tried it. And it's about person first or identity first language. Anyone heard of those phrases before or familiar with what those might mean? No? Okay. Well, good. Keeping in mind as you watch this video that words are very powerful tools, right? And they're tools that we all use. We use them casually, we use them formally, and this will give us two ideas of ways to kind of approach language and the use of language, especially with individuals with disabilities. So, let's see if we can get this going. Oh, hang on. Okay. Pull it up separately. Sorry. Technical difficulties.
You can just minimize it.
Will that do it?
Or not.
No.
You can close it. Well, we can just open it back up again.
You sure?
Mm-hmm.
Why can't I?
Oh, man. Where's the display
What?
one?
Nope. This is called growth mindset. We haven't figured out yet, but we just did. Okay.
And the volume is controlled by the computer, so
Okay.
I think it's
Good.
There we go.
right, give us 1 minute to
Yeah.
switch back.
As Nate is pulling that back up, thank you for your patience. Keep in mind then as we continue just the power that the words that we use carry and how subtle changes and just recognizing just the switch of a couple of words can make such a huge positive impact. Can probably better deliver the message that you're intending to deliver, as well as allow the person that you're speaking with to feel like you are respecting them and not predetermining something about them. However, we always want, just with anything, right? We don't ever want to assume somebody's preference or somebody's, what we think they must prefer, what we think that they would want. If we've heard someone use a certain type of language, we can mimic that, but it's always good to ask. So it's always good to then know a better understanding of which one they would be preferring. And so now we have Nate.
All right. So just to dive into this a little further and have a little more discussion about it. The interesting thing is that, or unfortunate thing or good thing, and in some view is that there's not a simple solution to this, right? Like there's not a hard and fast rule that you can always fall back on and refer to in the situation. It takes some kind of active listening and kind of being open to others' experience. But I think that when the video especially talks about person first language, it highlights some really important things, right? That for some people the disability is secondary to who they are, and it doesn't take up a big part of their life, or it may impact their life differently at different times, and so it's not central to their identity. And in those instances, then oftentimes people will prefer to have their what they view as their personal characteristics up front and first. And so in addition to allowing individuals to identify who they are, not what they are, it also can help to fight some inaccurate stereotypes, right? I think sometimes if you say that this is a blind person or this is an autistic person, I think sometimes there are stereotypes that can be automatically attached to that. But when you put the person first, I think it starts to push some of those stereotypes to the side. And then I think that one of the main points in the video too is that it's the lack of access that disables individuals rather than their disability, and I think for that reason some people prefer to have use the person first language. And then there's the other side of things, the identity first, which is equally valid and equally important, and equally strongly is held a belief for a different group of individuals. And the other thing to note, I think, is this can also evolve and change over time, right? A person's idea of how they view themselves or their identity could change. And so, they could move from, preferring person first language to identity first language. But, in this case, like the video was talking about, it really, it places the disability first as, a central and really important part of that person's identity and what they deal with on a day-to-day basis, what their experience is like as they move through the world. It's interesting because I think one of the main points for this sort of approach as well is that it also kind of emphasizes that it's not the disability that disables the person, it is the construct of society and how things are set up, in terms of lack of access and accommodations and things like that, that really is what kind of disables people and allows them to not have as full participation in society. And so I think there's a similarity there, even though the approaches are different. just a little bit more information. It is, there tends to be a preference for identity first language in the deaf community and the autism community. I think it more than anything, it's kind of a cultural thing. And so there's, that tends to be, central to the identity in that community. And so, there's tends to be a gravitation towards that identity first language. But again, also not a hard and fast rule. There are, people in both that, might, prefer to be, identified as a person with autism rather than an autistic person. And so it's highly individualized and depends on each person's perspective. I think that, one question, I get a lot, and I think it's, it's definitely related to, to this issue of, what's the preferences or what language we should use. But I get asked from time to time about the name of our office, for instance. So we are the Center for Disability Services. So just on the face of that, like, is that, so do you think that's using identity first language or person first language? Anyone? What are your thoughts? If we're the Center for Disability Services. Any guess?
Raise your hand if you think it's person first. And it's okay. You're not on camera. Person first. Okay. Raise your hand if you think it's identity first.
Okay, yeah. And I think it is identity first. It does feature the word disability prominently in the name of the office. And that's, something that, like I said, I'll get asked about from time to time. There are sometimes, people will wonder, why we don't change the name of the office. There are different colleges and universities across the country that have different names, like a lot of offices will be titled the Access and Accommodation Office. Others are like ours that where it's the Center for Disability Services. And I think my approach, our approach, like as kind of we move along and do our thing, is that I'm really kind of open to whatever the prevailing preference is. And I really can kind of see the positives of both sides, right? Keeping things as they are, as the Center for Disability Services, I think really is, in some ways, it's the students who are using our services are, kind of taking some ownership of that word, right? And kind of acknowledging that, that yes, they are a student with a disability. It's a part of who they are. It's something that, they should be proud of, and not something that should, be avoided or something that should be hidden. And so I think that, kind of taking some ownership of that term and, and using it in a positive, empowering sense, I think is important for a lot of people. And I think it can also, go a long way to, helping to reduce or eliminate some stigma around the topic, around disability. If it's something that's, prominently featured and, kind of proudly used, then I think that can, help to reduce stigma that might be associated to that, or seeking services from our office. And so I can absolutely see that perspective, and I can see the other side of it as well. I think that, there is something about, focusing on what our office does, which is, helping to provide equal access and accommodations for any student who might need them, rather than focusing on the disability. I think that, there's a potential that, it could be, there might be other students or more students who would seek us out if that word disability wasn't there. it's hard to know that for sure, but I think it's a possibility. And so that's, kind of an argument for, looking at, a change to the name of our office. But it really kind of, it's that discussion, like which is preferable, which, should you go with? And, and that's kind of the approach that we've taken so far, is that, I'm open, we're open. If, there was a group of students that, really expressed a preference to have it something different, and that would better reflect, kind of their approach to identity and what they would prefer. And so far, it just hasn't happened yet. So we're okay with keeping the name and moving forward with the way things are. And I think that has positives too. And so, but it's an interesting discussion, and again, it's also something that evolves. Like, this might change over the years, where, there may be a group of students who are using our offices that, really prefer person-first language and would prefer to focus on, the access and accommodations rather than, being the Center for Disability Services. And if that's, if that happens, then, then I'm open to that too, and we can take steps and go from there. And so, I think that just highlights a little bit about, kind of how complex an issue it is, and how nuanced it is, and that, it involves a lot of discussion, and kind of being open to hearing other viewpoints and where people are coming from, and trying to come to a place where we kind of meet in the middle and are able to kind of do what's best for everyone. And so I just wanted to share that example of where this kind of comes up, this discussion. In general, I think it's really important to remember that, that using the quote unquote right language is a journey. It's a process, right? It's not going to happen overnight. And to complicate matters further, there's not like a set of rules that you can memorize and follow, right? I think it's about being open. I do think it takes some time and being intentional about finding out what is important to other people, and kind of where they're at with things, what their preferences are, and in terms of how they identify and how they kind of experience things. And so that does take some time and effort to to kind of be in tune or attentive to that. I think another thing that is important to do is looking to try to identify terms that would be good to stop using. And so while it's hard to always know what's right in a given situation, I think there are some things that are wrong and that could be kind of phased out of everyday use and in our language. And so some of those things are, like words like, handicapped, or, kind of when Sharon was referring to, how it can be problematic to call someone with a disability brave or courageous. It's also problematic to, kind of, you talk about someone with a disability as being, poor, that poor person, or that unfortunate person.
How they suffer.
Right. Yeah. I think that I've talked with a lot of people with disabilities over the years, thousands, and not one person wants pity. They don't want people to feel sorry for them. It's they're living their life and trying to live their best life and just like everybody else is. And so they don't want pity. They don't want people to feel sorry for them. There's some other terms that get problematic too. And it's things like differently abled or special needs. And I think, within the disability community, things like that are, they're kind of viewed as patronizing, right? like you're trying to, talk around the issue and, come up with, a quote unquote nice way to say something. And it's something that's not appreciated in the community. And so it's again, it's something that, someone with a disability would rather not avoid the topic or, try to sugarcoat it or make it sound nice. There's a reality that they contend with on a day-to-day basis that, kind of can feel ignored if someone is trying to kind of use a cutesy term for it. Right. And so I think that's something to remember. So what do you use instead? Words like accessible, instead of handicap parking, accessible parking, students with disabilities, person first language. Diverse learners is a term that can be used for students who have learning disabilities and other neurodiversity. And then Frank, that was just that's on there because it reminds me of a story that I like to share. Just some background, like my office over in the S building is pretty close to the lobby. And so students will often come in and be hanging out in the lobby as they're waiting to take a test or, talk with someone else or whatever. And I'll overhear conversations from time to time. And this one day, there were a couple students in the lobby just hanging out. I think they were both waiting to test. One student was a student who was blind. And I knew him well because he had been here for a while, and so I knew it was him out there. And there was another student who was fairly new to our office. The student had a different disability, that was kind of characterized by very blunt communication, and maybe not a much of a filter when speaking, and so they were kind of very just open and would ask anybody anything. And so I hear them chatting in the lobby, and the one student had maybe had just like seen a presentation on person first language or something like that. And so as they were talking to the student who was blind, they asked them just bluntly, so do you prefer to be called a blind person or a person who is blind? And I hear the other student pause for a minute, and then he responded and said, "You can call me Frank." and I think because he didn't really identify as either, right? Like and that was just him and where he was at. And and that's how he approached it. He said, "You can, I don't really kind of prefer to be referred to as either. You can call me Frank." And so I sat in my office and chuckled about that for a while. I thought it was funny. Mm-hmm. And then just thinking about how to spread this, and I think that and this it can be a lot of different ways, but just kind of being really conscious of language that you're using as you go throughout your day-to-day, whether you're involved in student groups or you're a faculty member and you're creating materials for your class, like the language that you use in all of those things, you can review it and make sure that it's inclusive and it kind of could capture sort of both perspectives and not kind of alienate one group or the other, and you can always get input on that. Like there's good places to kind of search for inclusive language and examples and things like that. You can always run things by us for ideas, and we can review things. And so, but just being intentional about that and kind of making sure that you incorporate that and what you're doing as you go throughout your lives. And then, I think another just big takeaway is just that, if you're not sure, if you don't know, when in doubt, just ask. I think people appreciate curiosity more than assumption. Mm-hmm. And if you're not sure, how a person identifies or what they would prefer, you can ask. just like the student that was in the office. You know, I think it was a very blunt and straightforward question, but I think one that's appreciated, and I think that, you know, most people you talk to would rather that than, you know, kind of make an assumption about, you know, how it is that they identify or how it is that they see themselves. Does that make sense? This is, do you want to share your quote?
Sure, and then I had an idea.
Okay.
So something to think about is this quote by Tom Stoppard, and it's that words are sacred, they deserve respect. If you get the right ones in the right order, you can nudge the world a little. So that's the power, right, of the words that we choose to use and the words that we share all day, every day in many ways. And with the power of words, there's also this word that we've said several times, and it's preference. You know, and just the weight that somebody's preference carries on their, the way they see themselves, the way others see them, the way they feel in their day-to-day life. And so the words we use, if we're not respecting an individual's preference, can really, you know, have a negative impact. And so I thought of this while I was looking around the audience. So if everyone wouldn't mind for 1 second, I think if we experience the differences of a preference and what it's like to not have your preference used or present, what that feels like, and then if we multiply it by a significant amount when it comes to your identity, what that impact could be. So if I could have everyone in the audience and anyone who's watching at some point sit up straight for just a moment, as straight as you're able to, comfortably. And, you know, everyone has different postures and things, but if you could just, you know, clasp your hands in your lap. Yeah, just clasp your hands. And now you did that pretty quickly and automatically and easily, right? You know, there's nothing that I can tell that's prohibiting you from crossing your hands however you would do so. Now, if I said to you that for the rest of the day, you need to alternate the way you're crossing your hands. And so I want you to go like this so that the other thumb is on top and the fingers are going the alternate way. Who can feel a difference? Like nods are good. I see a couple nods. I see people's eyes like you're thinking about it either way, okay? It wasn't your preference. It wasn't your first go. And then if you had to sit like that and go through your whole day like this, being really conscious of something like that, right? It doesn't feel good. It might not feel terrible depending on what it is. You know, every person is different, right? There's a huge, I don't want to separate my hands, but we can't predetermine that it's going to feel awful and it's going to feel good. But we can recognize that it didn't feel like your preference, right? And so then who would be okay? And I know there are some people who would be like, yeah, it's okay. I could do this all day, sit here like this. And then who is, you know, I see some smiles. Who's like, yeah, I'm starting to feel a little like, you know, I really want to move my hands. Few nods. Okay, and there's other ways to do that, and you can separate your hands now. So then imagine, you know, the power of word in being like respecting and acknowledging an individual's preference and not presuming what it may be. If someone had to have interactions ongoing all day that made them feel like it's just not right, like you're just not seeing me, it doesn't feel like me, I'm not being seen, I'm not being heard, the negative impact that could have on an individual's sense of belonging, their sense of right to be here, their sense of place in the world. So by recognizing that, we help in that power of one, you know, take that away in our interactions, and we help to minimize that and eliminate that barrier and that struggle for individuals potentially with disabilities and in many other situations. So you think about that and think about ways that you can kind of make some changes yourself, recognize if you've said things or maybe how you could rephrase different words and phrases, and, you know, take it with you as you leave. So thank you. Didn't ask if there's questions. Questions?
Does anybody have any questions
Yeah.
or thoughts or anything you want to share? Nate. Hi. Nate Payovich, and yeah, I'm the director in the Center for Disability Services. You can always come see us if you ever have questions about anything. We're in the S building.
Yep.
Just down the hall from admissions and like registration and financial aid and stuff like that.
Okay. All right.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Yes.
How do you all keep up with how quickly language changes? I'm thinking about like what happens like in the disability community and like the reclaiming of language, and then those of us who are outside of that who might not be part of those conversations. How do we kind of keep up with like I don't know the best terms as society changes? Do you have any tips for that so that we kind of stay like aware of like what the best terms are, like how language is changing, things we should be using?
Yeah.
Want to repeat? So,
Sure. So the question is how do we stay on top of like the changing and evolving language, and like what the the best terms to use and what's acceptable and what's falling out of favor and that kind of thing.
my first thought was just being part of conversations helps. And when you're talking, I was like, right away, I'm like, oh, I have some examples of that where I was like, oh, I didn't know that was a word I could use, but I can't use it, actually, if I'm not a part of that community. So I think that's one important part. Like, some words aren't meant for everybody, and members of a certain community and group have the right and privilege to use a word that others don't, and so I think that's key. But we will hear words come up, and you think, oh, I didn't know if that was allowed, right? Or is that right or wrong? Or is that offensive or not offensive? And I just try to listen and have conversations. I ask. If I hear it, I'll ask. And sometimes that's part of the change, right? You might hear someone say something that you thought, and you ask, and they thought, oh, maybe I shouldn't be. Versus also another situation when you ask a question, and I'm not coming up with one, of course, right off the top of my head, but and you learn a lot about where that's coming from. And it is a lot, as you're probably getting at, Tish, I know. The reclaiming and the ownership and taking the power away from the negative of some words, and not allowing it to like predetermine as much.
I mean, like that's the main way that I keep up with things is really from talking with students. And I think that in the conversations that we have around accommodations and access and stuff in the college setting, that comes up a lot. And so I'll hear from students what everybody's preferences are, and then because I talk to so many people, like it's easier to notice some of the shifting trends and things like that. And so I think that's probably how I most keep up on things. But there are also a lot of good resources out there too. Like a lot of times when I'll even just Google inclusive language. And there are some good resources out there that that will discuss that, right? And again, like we've been saying, it's not that there's a right or wrong answer, but if you do kind of some active searching for that, like I think you'll start to see suggestions and thoughts about about different inclusive language and what maybe shouldn't be used anymore, and kind of where things are going. That kind of helps give you a better idea, or a place to start. But then it comes back to listening and being open to what the people who have lived experience with this, what their take on it is, and what their thoughts are about the changing landscape.
I think too, not being afraid of asking, not being fearful of posing a question, feeling like, oh, I don't want to acknowledge. It's like, it's already acknowledged. We already may know that there's a disability in this situation, or this person is living with a disability, or has shared that they have a disability. And so when that happens, then there's room to ask. And there's room for the person to say, I don't want to talk about it, but there's room to ask. And I think that, we want to be open to having a conversation and asking someone, even if it's about a word, or it's something you witnessed or something you observed, and something you want to improve. that helpful?
Any other questions,
Helpful?
thoughts, comments? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing your last day of class with us for some of you. Appreciate that. Have a great second half of the semester.
Yeah.